Constantinople, before it was a battlefield, before it was surrounded by cannons, before it became a prize to be taken, it was a city that existed almost outside of time, a city where history did not simply happen, it accumulated, layer upon layer upon layer. For more than 1,000 years, this city stood at the center of the known world, not because it was the largest, not because it was the richest, but because it was positioned exactly where worlds collided. Europe ended here. Asia began here. Empires passed through this narrow corridor like shadows, and Constantinople watched them all. The city had many names, many rulers, many languages echoing through its streets. But one thing never changed: its walls. Massive, ancient, confident. Walls that had turned away armies. Walls that had outlived emperors. Walls that whispered the same message to every invader: you may try, but you will not pass. And for centuries, they were right. Time moved differently inside Constantinople. While kingdoms rose and collapsed beyond the horizon, life within the city followed rituals older than memory. Church bells marked the hours, markets opened at dawn, ships entered the harbor like they had done for generations. Yet beneath this surface of routine, the city was slowly changing, not with explosions, not with fire, but with silence. Houses stood empty, streets grew quieter, entire neighborhoods faded into neglect. This was no longer the capital of a world-spanning empire. It was a city surviving on reputation, on memory, on the belief that the past alone could still protect it. Once, Constantinople had ruled from Britain to the Middle East. Once, its emperors commanded wealth beyond imagination. But by the 15th century, the empire had shrunk, not suddenly, not dramatically, but piece by piece by piece. Provinces were lost, trade routes shifted, rivals grew stronger, and while the city still called itself eternal, the truth was more fragile. The population had fallen drastically. Entire districts lay abandoned behind the walls. Fields appeared where palaces once stood. Inside the city, people whispered prayers not for victory, but for survival. Outside the city, the world had not stopped moving. A new power was rising, not from the west, not from the old Christian kingdoms, but from the east, the Ottomans. They had crossed mountains, they had crossed rivers, they had crossed continents, step by step, generation by generation. They surrounded Constantinople without touching it, like a tightening circle. On one side, Anatolia, on the other, the Balkans. The city now stood isolated, a single Christian island in a sea of Ottoman territory. For the Ottomans, this city was not just symbolic. It was a problem, an obstacle, a blade pressed into the heart of their lands. Without Constantinople, the empire was divided. With Constantinople, the empire would be whole. Many Ottoman sultans had understood this. Many had tried, and many had failed. The walls had held. The sea had protected the city. Time itself had seemed to favor Constantinople, until one ruler arrived who believed that time could be bent. His name was Mehmed II, later remembered by history as Mehmed the Conqueror. But at the beginning of this story, he was simply a young man. Too young, some said. Too ambitious, others feared. When Mehmed ascended the throne in 1451, he was only 19 years old. 19, an age when most kings were still learning how to rule. But Mehmed was not most kings. From childhood, he had been educated not just as a ruler, but as a visionary. He spoke multiple languages. He studied history obsessively. He read about Alexander, about Caesar, about emperors who reshaped the world. And in every story, one city kept returning, Constantinople. To Mehmed, it was not merely a city, it was destiny. He did not speak of it loudly at first. He did not declare his intentions publicly. Instead, he prepared, quietly, methodically, because Mehmed understood something that many rulers did not. You do not conquer Constantinople with rage. You conquer it with patience. The first step was control, not of the city, but of the sea, the Bosphorus, that narrow strip of water connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. As long as ships could pass freely, Constantinople could receive aid, food, weapons, soldiers. So Mehmed made his move. On the European side of the Bosphorus, directly across from an older Ottoman fortress, construction began. Stone by stone, tower by tower, Rumeli Hisara, a fortress built not for defense, but for dominance. It rose with terrifying speed. Villages were cleared, materials were forced through day and night. The message was unmistakable. Constantinople was being strangled. When Byzantine envoys arrived to protest, they were ignored. When they warned, they were dismissed. When they threatened, they were silenced. Literally, their execution ended diplomacy forever. From that moment on, there would be no turning back. Inside Constantinople, fear spread quietly. Not panic. Fear, a deeper kind, the kind that settles in the stomach and never leaves. People looked at the horizon differently now. They could feel it. Something was coming, and it would not stop. And inside the city, the silence grew heavier. Constantinople had survived for centuries not because it was loved, but because it was feared. Its walls were legends, its name carried weight, yet now that weight felt hollow. Emperor Constantine XI ruled a city that looked powerful from afar, but fragile up close. He walked streets where entire districts had fallen into ruin. He governed churches with more ghosts than worshippers. He commanded soldiers who were brave, but too few. Every morning, the same question returned, not spoken aloud, never spoken aloud, but felt. Would help arrive before it was too late. Letters had been sent west, to Rome, to Venice, to Genoa. Promises came back. Ships would come, armies would follow, faith would unite them. But promises do not stop cannons, and time was no longer on Constantinople's side. Inside the city, division weakened everything. Some believed salvation would come from the Latin West. Others feared that salvation more than defeat itself. Centuries of religious tension poisoned unity. Many whispered a phrase that history would never forget. Better the Turkish turban than the Latin crown. That sentence alone tells you everything. The city was already fractured, long before the walls were. Outside the city, Mehmed moved forward. Preparation became obsession. He did not rush the siege. He constructed it, piece by piece. The army grew, not just in numbers, but in discipline. Cavalry units trained relentlessly. Infantry drilled day and night. Janissaries, the elite, prepared in silence. But Mehmed knew walls like Constantinople's could not be taken by swords alone. They needed something else, something new, something terrifying. Cannons, not ordinary cannons. Weapons so large they challenged the limits of metallurgy itself. To create them, Mehmed brought a man named Urban, a master engineer. Urban promised the impossible, a cannon large enough to break the ancient walls. Metal was gathered from across the empire. Forges burned without rest. Molds were prepared like ritual objects. When the first cannon was tested, the sound traveled for miles. Villages shook, animals fled, the ground itself trembled. The message reached Constantinople long before the cannon did. The walls would be tested, and this time, they might fail. Transporting the cannons was an ordeal of its own. Oxen pulled them, Hundreds of men guided them. Bridges were reinforced. Roads were widened. Progress was slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Every mile closer felt heavier than the last. Inside Constantinople, watchers on the walls counted the days. They could see the dust rising in the distance. They could hear rumors before they heard thunder. When the Ottoman army finally appeared on the horizon, there was no shock, only confirmation. This was it. On April 6, 1453, the siege began. At first light, the cannons spoke, not continuously, not wildly, but deliberately. Boom, silence, boom, silence again. Each shot calculated, each impact measured. Stone cracked, dust rose, and the walls that had stood for 1,000 years responded. They absorbed the blows. They resisted. Cheers rose inside the city. Perhaps the legends were true after all. But Mehmed was patient, very patient. Day after day, the bombardment continued. The same sections, the same targets, over and over and over. Cracks widened. Defenders rushed to repair breaches under cover of darkness. They worked with desperation, with faith, with bare hands. They carried stones. They mixed mortar. They prayed while working. Above ground, the war raged. Below ground, another war began. Ottoman miners dug tunnels toward the foundations. Byzantine listeners pressed ears to the earth. When they heard digging, they dug back. Underground battles were fought in darkness. Fire, smoke, collapse. Men died without ever seeing the enemy. Days blurred together. Exhaustion became constant. Sleep turned into a memory. And still, the city held. At sea, hope remained. The Golden Horn, protected by a massive iron chain. As long as that chain remained unbroken, the northern walls were safe. The Byzantine fleet rested behind it. Confidence returned. Briefly, Mehmed studied the chain, not with frustration, with curiosity, then with imagination. Because Mehmed did not always remove obstacles, sometimes he went around them. On the night of April 21st, something extraordinary happened. Under cover of darkness, Ottoman ships were dragged, not through water, but over land. Wooden tracks were prepared, logs were greased, men pulled, animals strained, silently, slowly, ship by ship by ship. At dawn, the people of Constantinople woke to a nightmare. The Ottoman fleet was inside the Golden Horn. The impossible had happened. The city's weakest defenses were now exposed. Shock spread like fire. Morale collapsed. Panic followed. From that moment on, the outcome felt inevitable. But inevitability does not end resistance. It intensifies it. Emperor Constantine refused to flee, refused to surrender. He walked the walls personally. He spoke to soldiers. He reminded them of honor, of duty, of legacy, and they listened because there was nothing else left. Mehmed sent one final message: surrender and live, resist and perish. The emperor's answer was simple. The city had been entrusted to him by God, and he would die defending it. The stage was set. The final act approached, and everyone, on both sides of the walls, knew it. Knowing something is coming and waiting for it are two very different kinds of suffering. Inside Constantinople, time began to stretch. Hours felt longer than days. Days felt heavier than weeks. The city no longer measured life by calendars, but by sounds. The sound of cannons at dawn, the sound of stone breaking, the sound of men shouting on the walls, the sound of prayers whispered at night. Food became the first enemy. Not suddenly, gradually. Bread was rationed, oil disappeared, meat became a memory. Markets opened later and closed earlier. People stood in lines, not knowing if supplies would still exist when they reached the front. Children grew quieter, not because they understood, but because hunger teaches silence. At night, the city changed. Fires burned lower, voices softened, hope shrank. People spoke of signs, of dreams, of omens in the sky. Some claimed to see strange lights above Hagia Sophia. Others said the moon had darkened unnaturally. Fear fed on belief, and belief fed on fear. Inside the churches, prayers never stopped. Monks chanted through exhaustion. Candles melted into puddles of wax. God was being asked to do what walls could no longer guarantee. Emperor Constantine felt the weight of every prayer. He did not sleep. He walked the walls at night, listening, not to the enemy, but to his own city. The cough of a wounded soldier, the murmurs of civilians hiding in doorways, the distant sob of someone who believed no one could hear them. This was not how empires ended in stories. There were no triumphal marches, no dramatic speeches, only waiting. Outside the walls, the Ottoman camp was alive. Fires burned in thousands, drums echoed across the plain. But there was discipline, no chaos. Mehmed allowed no drunkenness, no disorder. He knew the final assault would require every ounce of strength and patience, because exhaustion breaks walls faster than cannons. The bombardment continued, relentless, predictable. Every morning the same sections were hit. Every night the same desperate repairs followed. The defenders became machines. Lift stone, place stone, fill gap, repeat. Their hands bled, their backs broke, but still they worked, until even desperation began to fail. Then came rumors. Rumors moved faster than armies. Some said Venetian ships were close. Some said Genoese reinforcements had landed. Others whispered darker things, that the city was cursed, that God had turned away, that the Virgin Mary had abandoned Constantinople. On May 28th, the bombardment stopped. Suddenly, completely, no thunder, no impact, just silence. And silence is never comforting. The city held its breath. From the Ottoman camp, no smoke rose, no movement followed, only stillness. Mehmed had ordered a pause, not out of mercy, but strategy. The final assault was coming. That night, the Ottomans prepared. Soldiers washed, weapons were sharpened, prayers were spoken, not loudly, not emotionally, calmly, as if accepting what must be done. Inside the city, bells rang, churches filled. Emperor Constantine attended his final service in Hagia Sophia. He confessed his sins. He asked forgiveness. He embraced those who would stand beside him. There were no speeches about victory, only acceptance. The city had reached the end of its strength. Before dawn, the Ottoman army moved, not all at once. Gradually, units took their positions. Commanders whispered orders. Torches were extinguished. The stars faded. Then, the signal. Drums, not chaotic, measured, slow at first, then faster. The first wave attacked. Light infantry. They ran. They climbed. They fell. Arrows rained down. Stones crushed skulls. Oil burned flesh. They were driven back. Then the second wave, heavier, more organized, more brutal. They pushed further. They held longer. Blood coated the ladders. Bodies piled at the base of the walls. Still, the city resisted. Then Mehmed released his final force, the Janissaries, silent, disciplined, relentless. They advanced not with rage, but with purpose. This was not chaos. This was execution. The defenders were breaking, not because they lacked courage, but because courage has limits, and those limits had been reached. A gate, a tower, a moment. History often turns not on grand events, but on small openings. The Kirkoporta gate, left unguarded, overlooked. Through it, Ottoman soldiers entered. Flags rose, Cries spread. The city is taken. Panic surged. Lines collapsed. Defenders fled. Emperor Constantine removed his imperial insignia. He drew his sword and disappeared into the chaos. No throne, no crown, only a man dying with his city. By morning, Constantinople had fallen, but the story was not yet over, because conquest does not end with victory. It ends with transformation. When the noise finally faded, something unfamiliar filled the air. Silence, not the peaceful kind, the hollow kind, the kind that follows a storm so violent that even echoes are afraid to return. Constantinople no longer resisted. Smoke drifted upward from shattered roofs. Dust hung between broken stones. The city that had believed itself eternal now stood exposed, vulnerable, mortal. Ottoman soldiers moved through the streets, some with caution, some with disbelief. They had entered a place that had existed in their imaginations long before their feet touched its ground. For a brief time, chaos ruled. This was the price of conquest in the 15th century. Doors were broken, voices cried out, but it did not last, because Mehmed arrived. And when Mehmed arrived, order followed. He entered the city slowly, not as a conqueror racing for glory, but as a ruler measuring responsibility. He looked at the walls, at the streets, at the people. This was not a city to be destroyed. This was a city to be inherited. He issued commands. The uncontrolled violence was stopped. Looting was limited. Fires were extinguished. Life, fragile as it was allowed to continue. Mehmed rode toward the heart of the city, Hagia Sophia, the greatest church of the Christian world, a building that had watched emperors crowned and empires fall. Its doors stood open. Inside, fear had gathered. Civilians huddled together. Prayers overlapped. Voices trembled. Mehmed dismounted. He entered on foot. He did not shout. He did not threaten. He looked upward, toward the massive dome. Then he knelt and prayed. That single moment carried a message louder than any battle cry. The city would not be erased. It would be transformed. Hagia Sophia became a mosque, not as an act of revenge, but as a declaration of a new era. Constantinople was no longer a symbol of a fading past. It was now the capital of a rising empire. Istanbul, the name would come later, but the identity was born here. Mehmed declared protection for those who remained. Greeks, Armenians, Jews. The city needed people, not ruins. Rebuilding began almost immediately. Markets reopened, homes were repaired, life incredibly returned. But the world outside the city felt the shock. The fall of Constantinople was not local news. It was an earthquake. Across Europe, bells rang in mourning. Kings panicked. Scholars fled west, carrying ancient texts. Trade routes shifted. Old assumptions collapsed. A 1,000-year empire was gone. In its place stood something new. For the Ottomans, this was validation. They were no longer a regional power. They were an empire, centered not on tradition alone, but on ambition. Mehmed ordered schools built, libraries established. He invited artists, scientists, philosophers. Istanbul would not merely rule, it would think. Yet even as the city adapted, the memory of its fall lingered. Every stone carried scars. Every street whispered history. The conquest had ended, but its consequences were only beginning, because history does not end with victory. It continues through change. Change does not arrive with a trumpet. It arrives quietly, almost unnoticed. While people are still counting the dead, history is already moving forward. The fall of Constantinople was not only the end of a city, it was the end of certainty. For centuries, Europeans believed their world had a center, and that center was unshakable. Now it was gone. Maps were redrawn, trade routes collapsed and reformed. Merchants searched for new paths, and in searching, they would eventually cross oceans. The age of exploration did not begin with courage. It began with loss, with a closed door, with a city that no longer belonged to the past. Scholars who fled Constantinople carried books westward. Ancient knowledge, preserved for centuries behind the walls, found new homes. Ideas traveled. Languages evolved. The Renaissance did not ignite in isolation. It was fed by a city that had fallen. For the Islamic world, the conquest carried a different meaning, a prophecy fulfilled, a promise completed. A young ruler had done what generations believed impossible. Mehmed did not stop learning after victory. He expanded, he reformed, he ruled with both fear and admiration. Under his vision, Istanbul grew. Mosques rose beside churches, markets connected continents, cultures intertwined. The city became what it had always been meant to be, a bridge between worlds, between eras, between beliefs. Yet even empires that rise must one day face time. Mehmed would die, the empire would change, but the city remained. Because cities are stronger than rulers, stronger than armies, stronger than myths. Today, when people walk through Istanbul, they walk through layers of history. Roman stones beneath Ottoman walls, Byzantine echoes inside modern streets. The conquest of 1453 is not locked in the past. It breathes in architecture, in language, in identity. A city fell, but in its fall, it reshaped the world. The Middle Ages ended, the modern age began, not with celebration, not with ceremony, but with silence after the walls finally broke.